Good morning, everybody. So good to have you here on this Sunday morning on every campus as we continue this series called Adam and Eve. And during this series, we've been talking about relationships between men and women. And in these last few weeks, as we bring this in for a landing, we're talking about the things that make men unique. And I just want to say right up front that, I'm glad to be a man. Nothing against women. Women are great. I have several in my life that I love very much. But I am thankful to be a man for several reasons because there are some things I like about being a man. Let me just share 5 of them with you. Here are 5 things I like about being a man. Number 1, a 5-day vacation requires only a backpack and 1 pair of shoes. And sometimes I don't even need that much. Number 2, the same hairstyle can last for years when you're a man, maybe even decades. Number 3 reason, phone conversations are over in 30 seconds flat. Number 4, this one's real simple. Wedding dress, $5,000. Tuxedo rental, $125. And one more reason I like being a man is this. I never have to drive to another gas station just because this one is too icky. A lot of good reasons for being a man, right? But let me just also say this, there are some downsides to being a man as well. I think there are some unique temptations that men face in our culture, and there are some unique ways that men can be deceived in our culture. And so today, we're talking about some of the lies that men believe. A few weeks back, we talked about the lies that women believe. Today, we're talking about the lies that men believe. And really, these apply to all of us, but I think especially they apply to men. And men, let me just say this, when we begin to believe these lies, it begins to undermine our character and undermine our relationship with God and make us very hollow men on the inside. And here's the point I want to drive home today, and I hope you'll remember this when you leave here today, especially if you're a man. It's this: a man who is outwardly strong but inwardly weak is consistently dangerous. If you're outwardly strong but inwardly weak, you will be consistently dangerous to yourself and to the people around you. I mean, think about it. A man who has power, whether it's physical power or the power of a position or the power of influence that comes with talent, if a man has power but he doesn't have a moral compass, that man can pose a danger to himself, to his family, and even to this culture. And today we're going to learn this lesson from a guy in the pages of Scripture whose name is Samson. Now, if you've grown up in church, you may be familiar with the story of Samson. I grew up in church, and I remember when I was a little boy, I had a picture Bible. And in the picture Bible, there was a picture of Samson, and I was just captivated by that picture. There was this picture of this guy with incredible physique and long hair, kind of pushing against 2 massive pillars. And I remember looking at that guy and thinking, man, I wish I could be Samson. And I felt that way for 2 reasons. Number 1, he had long hair. And I had a crew cut until I was 13 years old. And this was the 70s. So I just wished I could have had long hair like him. But then I also thought, man, if I could only be as ripped as he is, because when I was younger, I was really impressed with like bodybuilders and weightlifters and things like that. Obviously, I'm not that impressed with those things anymore, but I remember thinking how great it would be to be that guy in the kids' picture Bible. But as I got older and began to really understand the story of Samson, I began to see that Samson was a very different man than what I had thought. I began to see him in a different light. That Samson was physically strong, but he was spiritually weak. And because he was spiritually weak, he eventually lost even his physical strength, because a man who's outwardly strong but inwardly weak is consistently dangerous. And by the way, this message isn't just for men today. I'm going to talk as if it is just for men, but the rest of you can all listen in as well, because there's plenty for all of us here to apply. So Samson's story is found in the part of the Bible called the Old Testament, in a book called the Book of Judges. You can turn there if you want to, but it's probably going to be easier to follow along on the side screens or on the note sheet inside your bulletin. His story covers 5 chapters, and we don't have the time to dive into his story in detail, verse by verse. So I'm going to give you the big picture view, and then you can go back and read it on your own sometime this week. So let me encourage you just to take out the note sheet that's inside the bulletin, use that as a way to follow along, and take advantage of the app notes on the inside after you leave here today, and continue learning after church is done. Let me tell you one other thing we're encouraging you to do as kind of an outgrowth of this series. We're encouraging you, if you're married, once a month throughout the summer to date your spouse. And we're going to make it really, really simple for you. You don't need a babysitter. You don't even have to figure out where to go, because we're going to provide you with a date night packet. And inside this packet, there are some instructions how you can have a fun but simple date, and you can do it right in the comfort of your own home. So here's what you need to do. When you leave here today at every campus, find the black rack that's out somewhere in the lobby with these in it. Take one of these, one per family, take it home, follow the instructions, and sometime this month, take 1 hour out of your life to date your spouse. And then over the next couple of months, you'll see that rack out in the lobby again, and we'll provide you with another date night challenge during July and during August as well. Because we believe that the best gift you can give to your kids and the best gift you can give to your community is the gift of a strong marriage. So take advantage of the Married People Date Night Challenge, okay? We're going to jump in today with the story of Samson in Judges chapter 13, and I want you to see how his life began. Chapter 13, verse 2. A certain man of Zorah named Manoah from the clan of the Danites had a wife who was childless, unable to give birth. The angel of the Lord appeared to her and said, "You are barren and childless, but you are going to become pregnant and give birth to a son." So here you have this guy, Manoah, and his wife. We don't know her name, but she is physically incapable of bearing children. And then an angel shows up one day and says, "Guess what? You are going to give birth to a son." Now, I would suggest to you that's a pretty big deal. If before you were born an angel showed up and your parents were unable to conceive, and the angel shows up and tells your mom, "Hey, you're going to have a baby," I would say that God probably has a pretty big plan for your life if that's how things started with you. And that was certainly the case for Samson. In fact, here's what God says to these parents about the future of their son. It says, "He will take the lead in delivering Israel from the hands of the Philistines." Those were their enemies who were oppressing them. So Samson was born with the purpose of being a leader and a defender. He was created and called by God to fight for and defend the people of Israel. And by the way, I don't think that's exclusive to Samson. I really believe that God's invitation for every man is very much the same: to protect and to defend. Men, we are called to fight for what's right, to defend honor, to fight for our families. In fact, I would argue that the reason why our nation faces so many of the problems that it faces today is simply because there's so few men who are willing to step up. And I'm not talking about men outside the church. I'm talking about those of us who are Christians, who are believers. That we are called, just like I believe Samson was called, we are called to lead and to defend and to protect and just to be men. But Samson, he had some very specific instructions. Listen to this, also in verse 5. It says, "No razor may be used on his head, because the boy is to be a Nazirite, set apart to God from birth." Now, the Hebrew word Nazirite comes from the word Nazir, which means to set apart. And so a Nazirite was someone in the Jewish community whose life was solely and completely dedicated to God's service. Now, along with being a Nazirite, there were certain vows that a person had to make, some specific commitments that you had to keep, and you can find those in a part of the Bible called the Book of Numbers. But 3 things a Nazirite was required to do. Number 1, a Nazirite had to abstain from the fruit of the vine. He was not allowed to drink wine, not even allowed to eat grapes or even raisins. That was a symbol of comfort and luxury. It was a sign that they had given up comfort and luxury to follow God's will for their lives. Number 2, they had to avoid any contact with death. A Nazirite was not allowed to touch the remains of anything that was dead, whether human or animal. And number 3, he had to allow his hair to grow indefinitely. His hair was an outward symbol to everyone else that he had taken the Nazirite vow. It's kind of like my wedding ring. My wedding ring is an outward, always visible symbol that I am committed to my wife. The hair, the long hair, was an outward, visible symbol that the Nazarite, Samson in this case, was fully committed to God. So let me give you a way to remember this. 3 things. No berries, no bodies, no barbers. Okay, that's what he committed to. No berries, no bodies, no barbers. And I want you to remember those things as we go through his story, because we see how those become very important. And I want you to see some of the lies that Samson believed that made him inwardly weak. Let's pick up the story in chapter 14. Samson at this point is somewhere around 20 years old. He's an adult now. And I have to guess that at this point his parents must have been wondering, what is our son going to accomplish? How is he going to defend our nation? How is God going to use him in an incredible way? And here's the very first thing we read about Samson once he grows up. Chapter 14, verse 1. Samson went down to Timnah. And now Timnah was not a Jewish town. It was a town in Philistine territory. So he went down to Timnah and saw there a young Philistine woman. When he returned, he said to his father and mother, I have seen a Philistine woman in Timnah. Now get her for me as my wife. That was a big problem. See, God had commanded the people of Israel to never intermarry with the pagan nations around them, lest they be corrupted by them. But on top of that, Samson's purpose in life had been to protect the people of Israel from the Philistine people, and now he's marrying one of them. So he comes home one day. He says, hey, Mom and Dad, I found the girl I want to marry. Well, who is she, son? Well, I don't know her name yet, but I saw her, and she looks really good. And she's a Philistine. And at that point, their world started to cave in. And they tried to talk him out of it because his parents were very godly people. Verse 3, his father and mother replied, isn't there an acceptable woman among your relatives or among all our people? Must you go to the uncircumcised Philistines to get a wife? And his response tells us volumes about his character. But Samson said to his father, get her for me. She's the right one for me. He's basically saying, Dad, I don't care what you and Mom say. I don't care what's right or wrong. In fact, I don't even care what God says. I'm a man. I've got desires. She looks good. I want her. Here's the first lie. First lie that Samson believed was this one. I don't need anyone to tell me what to do. Guys, let's be honest. We all have an independent streak within us, don't we? We resist being given instruction from authority. It's kind of like you buy something new and it says on the box, some assembly required. So what do? You get home and you assemble it without reading the instructions, right? Because you don't need to read the instructions. You're a man. The instructions are in there, but they're in there for women. We need to figure it out on our own. See, that's the challenge in it. We want to conquer it. Now, it's no big deal if you don't read the instructions when you're putting together a toy for your kids. But as men, here's what we do. We bring that attitude with us into all of life, and we say, you know what? I don't need anybody's help. I can figure this out on my own. In fact, I don't even need God's help because I'm a man. Now, here's what I've learned. When you ignore the instructions that God has given you for life, you really mess things up every time. In fact, let me just give you a verse. This is for all the men in the room right here. Proverbs 16:18. This is one of those verses when you read it, you just want to highlight it. At least I want to highlight it with a black highlighter because it's so convicting. I don't even want to have to read it again. It says this, pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall. And when you believe the lie that says, I don't need anyone to tell me what to do, that's pride. And pride always leads to destruction. You know what? Samson eventually figures this out, but not until it's pretty much too late. At the end of the story, Samson is taken prisoner, his eyes are blinded, he's chained, and he's made to do servant's work. But listen to what it says in chapter 16, verse 28. First time Samson ever prays, it says this, then Samson prayed to the Lord, Sovereign Lord, remember me. And the inference is, remember me even though I've forgotten you. Please, God, strengthen me just once more. Do you see how he begins that prayer? He says, Sovereign Lord. See, now he gets it. That God is and should have been sovereign over his life. Let me tell you something, man. Satan doesn't care if you know who God is. He really doesn't care if you just have this general belief in God. But I'll tell you this, he just doesn't want you to see God as the sovereign Lord. Because if he's just God, then you can kind of put him on a shelf Monday through Saturday and bring him to church with you on Sunday. But if he's the sovereign Lord, that means you accept his authority in every single area of your life and you're willing to submit to him. So don't believe the first lie. Because you believe this first lie, it's going to make you inwardly weak, even if you're outwardly strong. And that first lie is this: I don't need anyone to tell me what to do. Watch how that gets Samson in trouble. Let me pick up the story in verse 5. We'll keep reading here. It says, Samson went down to Timnah together with his father and mother. As they approached the vineyards of Timnah, suddenly a young lion came roaring toward him. The Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him, so that he tore the lion apart with his bare hands, as he might have torn a young goat. But he told neither his father nor his mother what he had done. Then he went down and talked with the woman, and he liked her. Sometime later, when he went back to marry her, he turned aside to look at the lion's carcass, and in it he saw a swarm of bees and some honey. He scooped out the honey with his hands and ate as he went along. When he rejoined his parents, he gave them some, and they too ate it. But he did not tell them that he had taken the honey from the lion's carcass. Now, why did he not tell them? See, any guy who had a story like that, he would tell it to anybody who would listen. I guarantee you. Why didn't he tell his parents? Because he didn't want them to know that he had violated his Nazirite vow. Do you remember the three things in the Nazirite vow? No berries, no barbers, no bodies. You cannot touch a dead body. That's why he didn't tell his parents, because he had compromised his vow, and they didn't know it, and it was secret, and it was seemingly small. But let me keep reading. Verse 10. Now his father went down to see the woman, and there Samson held a feast, as was customary for young men. Now, the word feast here doesn't mean that they set up a buffet table and had potato salad and deviled eggs. Okay, the word feast in this passage is the Hebrew word mishta. And the word literally means drinking party. That's what kind of feast it was. So to put it in very realistic terms, Samson threw himself a kegger. He did. And there is nothing in the text to indicate that he was drinking Pepsi while everybody else was drinking the good stuff. You remember the Nazirite vow? No bodies, no barbers, no berries. Again, within a very brief period of time, a second violation of that vow that he had made to God. Do you see what's happening here? Samson was making these small compromises. He was moving away from God one step at a time, because when you believe the lie, number one, that you don't need anybody else's help, then you start to believe the second lie, which is this: this is really no big deal. This makes us inwardly weak even if we are outwardly strong. It's really no big deal. Samson says, it's really no big deal. I'm just going to eat a little bit of honey from the dead body of this lion. It's really no big deal. I'm just going to have a little bit of wine. After all, it is my bachelor party. It's what people do. And this happens all the time with guys. You know, some guys minimize their sin because it's secret. And they say, you know what, I'm not hurting anybody. Nobody else knows about it but me, and what I do in private, that's just my business. Other guys minimize their sin just because they think they're so good in so many other areas of life. And they say, well, you know, I'm generally a good guy. I'm a good dad. I'm a pretty good husband. It's just this one area of my life that is just my one vice, my one guilty pleasure. And so guys, what we are so tempted to do is just take these little small compromises and say, you know what, it's really no big deal. But here's what I think we all know about life deep down inside. It is in those small and seemingly insignificant decisions we make today that we set ourselves up for what tomorrow is going to look like. And this is what happens to Samson. See, most people, when they think of the story of Samson, they only know the last chapter. Samson and Delilah. Yeah, when he hooks up with Delilah in the last chapter, that's the part that everybody knows about his story. But the reason why Samson couldn't say no to Delilah, as we'll see in a couple minutes, is because he'd never learned the habit of saying no in the smaller areas of his life. And so when it came time to say the big no, he couldn't say the big no because he had never been able to say the smaller no's. Let me illustrate it this way for you. Go ahead and try to guess the creature in the animal world that is most deadly to human beings. What creature is most deadly to human beings? Just turn to somebody next to you and venture a guess. Go ahead. Just shark, cobra, bear, unicorn. What is it? You want the answer? Here's the answer. The mosquito is the most dangerous creature there is. Throughout human history, mosquitoes have killed more people than have been killed in every single war. Every year, more than 1 million children in Africa die because of mosquito-borne illnesses. And see, we don't usually think of mosquitoes as a menace, do we? As a threat. We think of them as a nuisance. Here's what we do, guys. We look at some of the choices we make, and we don't think of them as a threat. We simply think, it's just this little thing. It's no big deal. But listen, the small choices we make today will determine where we end up tomorrow and in the future. I've never met a guy who said, my goal in life is to become an alcoholic. Never met that guy. Never met a guy who said, you know what, my goal in life is 20 years from now to be bankrupt. Never met a guy who said, you know what, my goal is to eventually blow up my family and alienate my kids so they never talk to me again. Nobody says that. Nobody plans that way. But lots of people get there. Why? Because here's what we do say. It's just one drink. It's just one phone call. It's just one lie. It's just one decision. It's just one purchase. It's just one spring break. And we make one choice at a time and take one step at a time, and eventually we find ourselves somewhere that we never, ever imagined we would be. Guys, what is God warning you about right now? What is that thing in your life where you're saying, yeah, it's no big deal? It could become a big deal. And you just need to not believe that lie. So here's what happens in Samson's life. He never actually marries this woman. Very interesting story. You'll have to read it on your own. The whole thing just falls apart, and God actually uses that as a way to create a conflict with Samson and the Philistines so that he would actually do his job. But it was in those younger years and in those early decisions that Samson sets the path for where his life would end up. In those early years, he was gradually becoming a man who was outwardly strong but inwardly weak and therefore consistently dangerous. Let's jump ahead. Chapter 16. One day, Samson went to Gaza, where he saw a prostitute. He went in to spend the night with her. The people of Gaza were told, Samson is here. They surrounded the place and lay in wait for him all night at the city gate. They made no move during the night, saying, at dawn, we'll kill him. I got to understand something. Gaza was the capital city of the Philistines. It was a well-guarded city surrounded by huge walls, a place where he could easily be trapped. It was foolish for him to go there. But it just shows us how driven he was by his passions, outwardly strong, inwardly weak. So he ends up in this city, he is trapped, but he was a smart guy. Verse 3. But Samson lay there only until the middle of the night. So they're all sleeping, waiting for him. Then he got up, took hold of the doors of the city gate, together with the two posts, and tore them loose, bar and all. He lifted them to his shoulders and carried them to the top of the hill that faces Hebron. One estimate I read says that these gates probably weighed more than 700 pounds. Now, 700 pounds is a lot of weight. 700 pounds is about what I can deadlift. And by deadlift, I mean the last thing I lift before I die. 700 100 pounds, and he carries it. And Samson gets away this time. But he's taken an incredible risk, and he's beginning to believe a third lie. And this is the third lie that will make you inwardly weak. It's this one: I'm strong enough to handle this. Samson begins to say, I can break the rules. I can do whatever I please. I can make these not small decisions now, but big, bad decisions, and I'm not going to get caught. I can handle this. And this leads to a relationship that eventually does him in. Verse 4, sometime later, he fell in love with a woman in the valley of Sorek. Again, this was in Philistine territory, whose name was Delilah. And you know, the word love is here, but it wasn't really a relationship of love. He was using her. She was using him. He was using her for sex. She was using him to make some money, because here's what happened. The rulers of the Philistines went to her and said, see if you can lure him into showing you the secret of his great strength and how we can overpower him, so we may tie him up and subdue him. Each one of us will give you 1,100 shekels of silver. That added up to about 150 pounds of silver, which was a huge sum of money in that day, which tells you how badly they wanted to get this guy, how angry they were with him. But they knew he was too strong to physically beat, so they had to find the chink in his armor. They had to find the way to get to him. They've been watching him. They knew how to get to him. They knew he was outwardly strong, but inwardly weak. And they knew that if they could leverage his lust, they would get him. So they get him through an attractive woman. Verse 6, so Delilah said to Samson, tell me the secret of your great strength and how you can be tied up and subdued, because I'm so impressed with you and I'm just interested. Samson answered her, if anyone ties me up with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been dried, I'll become as weak as any other man. Then the rulers of the Philistines brought her 7 fresh bowstrings that had not been dried, and she tied him up with them. With men hidden in the room, she called to him, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. But he snapped the bowstrings as easily as a piece of string snaps when it comes close to a flame. So the secret of his strength was not discovered. Now remember, the Philistines are hiding. For all he knows, she's just playing games with him. Then Delilah said to Samson, you have made a fool of me. You lied to me. Come now, tell me how you can be tied. He said, if anyone ties me securely with new ropes that have never been used, I'll become as weak as any other man. So Delilah took new ropes and tied him with them. Then with men hidden in the room, she called to him, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. But he snapped the ropes off his arms as if they were threads. Delilah said to Samson, all this time you've been making a fool of me and lying to me. Tell me how you can be tied. He replied, and I think this happened over weeks. I don't think this happened all on one date. He replied, if you weave the 7 braids of my head into the fabric on the loom and tighten it with the pin, I'll become as weak as any other man. So he's talking about his hair. He's starting to get close. So while he was sleeping, Delilah took the 7 braids of his head and wove them into the fabric and tightened it with the pin. Man, this guy is a deep sleeper. And she called to him, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. He awoke from his sleep and pulled up the pin and the loom with the fabric. Now, you would think by now he would have figured out what was going on. But this is the way we are sometimes, guys, right? Even in the face of obvious danger, we keep going back to something because it feels so good, and we believe the lie, I can handle this. I won't get bitten by this. A few years ago, I saw a very interesting video about a road in the country of Bolivia. The road is called El Camino de la Muerte. The road is 40 miles long, and in those 40 miles, it drops 12,000 feet in elevation from the Andes Mountains into the Amazon jungle. The road is unpaved. It's about 10 feet wide in most places. There's a 3,000-foot drop-off on one side and a mountain on the other side. Do you know what El Camino de la Muerte means in English? It means the road of death. Yes. It is considered the most dangerous road in the world. An average of 26 vehicles fall off of that road every year, many of them buses, and 200 to 300 people lose their lives on this road every year. But here's what's so interesting to me. In the last 10 years, this road has become a very popular tourist attraction, especially among mountain bikers. Every year, hundreds of bikers travel to Bolivia from all over the world for their chance to ride on the road of death. That was Samson. He was taking a ride on the road of death, and instead of running from temptation, he just kept getting closer and closer and closer to the edge. And finally, on the fourth date, she pulls out all the stops. Verse 15. Then she said to him, "How can you say I love you when you won't confide in me?" She says, "This is the third time you've made a fool of me and haven't told me the secret of your great strength." With such nagging, she prodded him day after day until he was sick to death of it. Yes, nagging is a time-tested method for wearing a man down. So he told her everything. "No razor has ever been used on my head," he said, "because I've been a Nazirite dedicated to God from my mother's womb. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, and I would become as weak as any other man." When Delilah saw that he had told her everything, she sent word to the rulers of the Philistines, "Come back once more. He has told me everything." So the rulers of the Philistines returned with the silver in their hands. After putting him to sleep on her lap, she called for someone to shave off the 7 braids of his hair, and she began to subdue him, and his strength left him. Then she called, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." He awoke from his sleep and thought, "I'll go out as before and shake myself free." And then at the end of verse 20 is one of the most tragic sentences anywhere in the Bible. But he did not know that the Lord had left him. He was so far gone spiritually that he didn't even realize that the presence of God was no longer with him. That's how inwardly weak he had become. Verse 21, then the Philistines seized him, gouged out his eyes, and took him down to Gaza. Binding him with bronze shackles, they set him to grinding in the prison. I mean, this was a man who had been born with great potential, chosen to be a fighter in a great cause. He was called to be the defender of God's people, and now he's blind, bound in chains, and humiliated. Here was a guy that was strong enough to carry 700-pound gates for miles, but he wasn't strong enough to control his own passions. Men, don't settle for being strong in your career, in your job. Don't settle for being strong in sports. Don't settle for being strong in your hobby. Don't settle for just being strong physically or mentally. Be strong spiritually, because a man who is outwardly strong but inwardly weak is consistently dangerous to himself and others. Don't believe the lies that say, I don't need anyone to tell me what to do. We all need our Father in heaven to tell us what to do. Otherwise, we'll make a mess of our lives, and sometimes we need people around us to get in our faces and tell us what we do. Number 2, don't believe the lie that says it's really not a big deal, because even things that seem like they aren't a big deal can create situations that are a really big deal, and you'll wish you could wind back the clock to those things that you thought were not a really big deal. And don't believe the lie that says, I'm strong enough to handle this. Just run. Just run. And here's what I know about us, guys. None of us want to destroy ourselves. None of us want to be outwardly strong and inwardly weak. That's not the vision for our lives. But here's the problem. There's someone else who has the vision for your life, and that's the enemy of your soul. And Jesus said it this way, the thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. But I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. I want you to have life and have it to the full and be the kind of man who gives life to those around you. So I pray that all of us will commit ourselves to living according to the truth and not according to the lies.